Welcome to Note Doctors. My name is Paul.
My name is Jenn.
My name is Ben.
And we are your hosts. We are all university music theory instructors who are passionate about music theory and music theory instruction. In this podcast, we will be talking about all things theory with some of the best music theory teachers in the country. If you want to know more about music theory and the most effective and innovative ways to teach it, this is the podcast for you. Hello and welcome back to Note Doctors, the music theory and pedagogy podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We have a great episode coming up here. We are talking to the one and only Dr. Toby Rush, or Tobias Rush, which is actually on his website at the University of Dayton. It's Tobias, but he goes by Toby. We have a great conversation with him coming up. But Jen, first let our listeners know a little bit more about Dr. Rush.
Absolutely. So Toby is an associate professor at the University of Dayton, where he oversees music theory, aural skills, composition, and music technology. His research interests include music theory and aural skills pedagogy, educational technology, interactive web design, and Braille music notation. Over the last several years, he's been working with Stephanie Acevedo of University of Connecticut to overhaul the traditional undergrad music theory curriculum and make it more diverse, accessible, and relevant to 21st century musicians, a project which was given an honorable mention for the Society of Music Theory's inaugural Award for Diversity course design in 2021. And we talk a lot about that course redesign and many other things. It's a great conversation.
But with the electronic stuff, that's something that I think we need to really start taking seriously from a music theory point of view. It's always been sort of, in my mind, sort of sidelined into music technology courses, which are almost never, in my experience, required. They're always here's some cool stuff that you can take if you're interested in it. I mean, this is what's creating music nowadays, and if we don't, if we're not educating our students on that, then we're not doing them any favors.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Note Doctors. Thank you so much for tuning in to listen to our episode. We have an awesome guest, Toby Rush from University of Dayton, so up in Ohio. So I'm actually from northeastern Ohio, so it's very close to my heart up there. And so we're really excited to talk with you, Toby, about all the really cool and innovative things you do in the theory classroom. But before we get into some of those things, we always like to ask our guests a little bit about how they got into theory. So, how did you get into theory? And also, on a second point, what is it like having one of the top 5 coolest music theorist names of all time? I mean, wow. Toby Rush. I mean, how cool is that? I want to learn from Toby Rush.
I never, that's really the first time anyone's ever said that to me, which I'm flattered. But we always fill out the little NPR, what is your NPR name, and that kind of thing. So wow, I'm really amazed. I started. So this is going to totally date me, but my first kind of experience in music in general was apparently, according to my mom, when we came home from watching the original Star Wars in 1977. I was 3 years old. I went to the piano and was plunking out the theme. Wow. And she was like, we need to get that kid into piano lessons. So I was in, piano lessons and doing music from a really young age. And it really wasn't so in high school then I was the composer kid. I was the one who was writing sonatas or whatever. I say sonatas. I think it was a sonata maybe, but I was enjoying that, and my other students were performing some of my stuff and that kind of thing. And so when it came time to choose a college, I was pretty clueless, and also my parents weren't going to send me to some super high expensive place. So we kind of just looked around locally, and I ended up going to Adams State. It's now Adams State University, but it was Adams State College. This was in southern Colorado. And they had a music ed degree and a music performance degree. And I know I didn't really want to be a performer. So I went into music ed, and it was, a K through 12 degree, which again, I was composing, that kind of thing, and I enjoyed it. And did my student teaching semester, which I really thought was a fantastic experience. I ended up teaching in a rural school district, so I was like, I started the morning at the middle school, then I went to like one elementary school, then I went to another elementary school, and then I ended at the high school, which is like pretty typical for a rural music educator. And it was it was a really good experience, and it was really valuable. And I think the thing that I learned from that experience was that I didn't want to be a K through 12 music educator. And it wasn't that I was like, it wasn't because I hated it or anything like that. I was like, wow, this just isn't me. So I was like, well, I guess I'll go to grad school. So I went up to Greeley, Colorado, University of Northern Colorado. And I had still been composing, so I thought, okay, well, I'll get a theory and comp degree. And in the process there, got a TA teaching freshman theory, and then it was like, oh, okay, this is where I want to be. Like, that was, I always tell my students and my kids too, is like, look, I didn't figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up until like after I had gotten my bachelor's degree. So don't stress out, on that first day of your freshman year. But so I decided I stayed there and got my doctorate, and looked around, and actually that was 10, 15 years ago, and came out to University of Dayton, where they gave me a tenure track position. And and I've just always I've loved teaching and figuring out how people enjoy music and how they understand music and how it makes sense to them. Honestly, I think one of my first sort of moments in that was teaching when I was a student teacher. One of my cooperating teachers had to like retake her licensure exam or something like that. It was like, I don't remember the situation, but she needed to learn some theory stuff. So I was like teaching her intervals, and like I hadn't taken, this was after my bachelor's degree. I hadn't taken like any pedagogy classes or anything like that. So it was like, I just kind of figured out how I understood intervals and kind of created a lesson for her to teach her. And I guess it worked. But so, yeah, I've always felt a little bit, especially as I work with people from, Ivy League schools and that kind of thing. I always felt sort of the outsider, like, okay, well, I kind of figured a lot of this stuff out on my own, and it's probably wrong, that kind of thing. And I guess you just keep doing that until pretty soon people start treating you like you know what you're doing. So that's kind of where I'm at now. But yeah, that's pretty much what kind of led me to where I am now, which I love. I love my job. I love going to school every day. I always feel bad when I see on Twitter people, it's like, oh, academia is the worst. Like, well, I kind of love it actually, but I'm not going to make a big stink about it. So.
That's great. And Jenn, you have a similar kind of story about being music ed and realizing after student teaching that this is not what you
and even
do.
a really similar, my student teaching was K-12.
Yeah.
And so it was similar. It was like, kindergartners at 8 a.m. and then middle school band and choir and then high school band and choir.
Right,
and, maybe in the middle we go back and teach fifth grade. And, it was crazy.
Yeah.
And I also had the same feeling of like, this is great, but this isn't it.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, it gave me such a huge respect for the people who work in K through 12, middle school band teachers. Like, I'm not worthy. Like, they are amazing people because I know they're passionate about music, and a lot of times they have to kind of almost bottle that up a little bit and deal with some of the more general elements of education, and certainly all of the, the bureaucracy and whatnot that comes with that sort of a degree.
Right.
Whereas here, it's totally normal for me to just kind of go full geek out on a, unsuspecting freshman and say, oh yeah, that works this way, and it's not gonna cause too many problems, I don't think. But yeah, right. I agree.
Right. Well, and I definitely, I've said this many times before, but I benefit every day from having had that education training and that background. Even though I didn't end up in K-12, I still use all of that for lesson planning, for curriculum planning, for just classroom management, all of those things.
Exactly. Yeah. It's kind of funny right now. So I have 6 kids, and they go from, my youngest is 7 years old. My oldest is 20. But my third oldest right now he's going to be starting his junior year in high school, and he is just fallen head over heels in love with marching band. Like, he is out there doing band camp. He's running to do the push-ups or whatever things that, which is great. And so I haven't, like, I've kind of made a policy of like, okay, I'm not going to just push all my kids to be in music because I want them to figure out what they want to do.
Right.
But I'm starting to get ready to say, hey, you know what, music ed, it's a great, like this, you are totally that person. Like, you're gonna really enjoy it if that's the way you want to go. So yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, that's great. I did just band in my student teaching. I just did band, and even with that, I kind of had the same experience where it was great, but it wasn't like super fulfilling for me, especially compared to my colleagues. I found my colleague coming back to class and saying, "Oh my gosh, I miss my students so much. I can't wait to, get my own classroom." And I was thinking, I can hold off a little bit.
I actually don't miss them. Yeah. No.
Yeah. But I love teaching. So that's the thing. It's like, but where's my place? I knew that wasn't exactly it. And I feel like, we kind of carve our own way sometimes, and figuring out things on the fly. I think that's the super strength for you. Sometimes you get clouded by your previous conception of something kind of clouds your vision of like a curriculum or a lesson. Mm-hmm. And then to have like almost a blank slate can create like a really unique viewpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've learned to trust that a little bit more. Yeah. As I get older and recognize that, certainly with a lot of the stuff that's happening now, it's like we're trying to break away with kind of the way it's been done for years and years and years. And so, of course, I look back on like my first TA and I just cringe at how, like that year was just like I could have easily been swayed to not, enjoy that. But for whatever reason, it just kind of resonated with me. And yeah, so I've continued to enjoy it.
Well, one of the first things that I found of yours online, this is years and years ago, were these sheets. They are light blue and white with these cartoon. There's a dog. I remember there's a cartoon dog.
That's right.
And each sheet was a theory topic, and it was taught in a really interesting and dynamic way. It was funny. It would have little jokes in the margin. It was kind of like someone's notes about a topic, and the topic there too. So you get these kind of multiple perspectives going on, and the whole series is called Music Theory for Musicians and Normal People, which I love that title. And there's continued to be like dozens and dozens of these sheets, and they were really kind of a lifeline for me on a few occasions where I was like, I got to teach this Augmented Six, and you have this Augmented Six sheet, right?
Yeah.
And so, can you talk to us a little bit about why you created these, and maybe you can even explain it a little bit better than I did, what they really are?
Right. Well, that's fine. And I've always kind of struggled at being able to explain what they really are. But yeah, so these, and yeah, so many people I've gone viral a few times with it, which generally amounts to me like figuring out why is my website down for whatever reason, and then like apologizing, but which is super flattering, obviously. But no, these started out almost as a joke with so this was when I was teaching at the University of Northern Colorado. Kind of in my banter with my students, I would always kind of say, oh yeah, when I make my theory textbook, it's going to be a comic book, kind of just as a joking sort of thing. But then I kind of got thinking about it, and I thought, well, that would actually be pretty cool. But this was also like, when I was young enough and intimidated enough by the discipline that I was like, okay, well, I don't know if that's, could be a real thing. And in fact, one of the things that sort of emboldened me to push forward with it was it was on the news or something like that. So 9/11 happened, and then there was the commission for, they had the politicians where they kind of was like going, what exactly happened? They made this gigantic report, which I'm sure like few people read, but I saw in the news that a couple of artists had gotten together and they basically made a comic book version of the 9/11 Commission report as a way of making it more kind of digestible. And I was like, that's what I'm talking about. Like that, here's somebody else, doing something pretty serious with that. And now I don't consider myself an artist by any stretch of the imagination. I wish I could draw better than I can, but I thought, that's the sort of packaging that especially college students, like that really works for them. And so I started doing these just for my own class. I just made, they started out as essentially just review sheets. I would say, okay, well, here's basically a summary of this lesson. And and of course my class loved them. And then they started, this was mid 2000s. They're like, well, you have to put these online. And so I thought, well, okay, I can, but I'm not trying to, make any big statement with them. And I did. And of course, then they started going crazy and everyone seemed to really enjoy them. And I'd start, going to like conferences and people was like, oh, I know you. You're that guy that has the So, and what I found, though, like they actually helped me in a way, too, is because I forced myself, like you said, to keep it to one page per topic. And when you do that, you really have to figure out what do you want to put in, and more importantly, what can you leave out. And part of it then is how can you explain this in the simplest or most efficient way. Not necessarily like, I'm just not going to talk about this, but like, how can I incorporate this? And so sometimes like, musical examples will be there that, serve a bunch of different purposes to kind of do that. So yeah, that's something that, I've always really enjoyed messing with those, and I'm ashamed that I haven't made more recently, but life gets busy. But yeah, that's something that I also, we talk like a lot of stuff in the discipline lately is talking about public music theory, and that was sort of an early experience of mine with that, where it's like, okay, there's a lot of stuff out there that is easy to digest like this, but it's not very good, or it's not very comprehensive, or it's, it only covers up to intervals and nothing more. And so I thought, well, what if I could do that and have it still be, have some academic rigor to it. And I'll admit that, it was an opportunity for me to kind of speak my own opinions about things. I think the species counterpoint stuff, I have my own sort of feelings about how Fuchs is really kind of flying on his own.
Yeah, you throw some shade, I think, on Fuchs, right?
Well,
that one.
It's kind of I think that also speaks to teaching students to be critical of who's speaking and where that information is coming from, and so I welcome disagreement with that. But yeah, no, it's been a lot of fun. I throw them together in Adobe Illustrator, and I spent probably a day or two making the little note guy, and I just have him like looking in different ways and different smiles, so I can just copy and paste and yeah, Sparky the music theory dog, which was also an early joke in my class. I've never actually had a dog. I've got a couple cats at home, but it just seemed like a fun. It was like the in my theory class, it was like the mascot. It's like, oh, Sparky says get your assignments in on time and that sort of thing. So it sort of worked out pretty well for that. So yeah, that's always been a lot of fun, and I do promise to get back to those at some point. I know a lot of people. I've actually spoken to a lot of people that kind of use them as a theory textbook, which I'm really flattered by. I don't feel like they're complete enough for that. Like I feel like it's good for sort of reviews, but hopefully people are not just saying, okay, here's music theory and that's it. There's a little bit more to it than that.
That's the problem, and that's what we've learned too. Is you put stuff online, and then you become an expert all of a sudden, you're not an expert.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's totally it.
I mean, we were asked to speak at the Texas SMT conference on a plenary talk on pedagogy. What on earth? Why us? I mean, you have Gary Karpinski zooming in, and we have all these amazing people in the room, and we're talking to you. And
that's
so
it. Yeah, it's that again. It's like, that's when I talk to people who are like, oh, I've got so much imposter syndrome. It's like, no, we're all in the same boat. Like none of us know what we're doing, but pretty soon people start talking to us like we do, and then you kind of say, well, I guess I must have something to say then. So yeah,
exactly.
Oh, I just love your commentary under each poster, like on the website, under suspensions. Incidentally, dogs can only hear dissonance in black and white. Like, I love these. I love all of them.
I'm well known in my department as being the resident dad, and primarily because of the dad jokes. I run our Friday afternoon student recitals, and I can't walk off the stage without them demanding a dad joke from me. So yeah, I've got a reputation to uphold.
Oh, that's great.
I mean, in terms of using them as a textbook, the big upside is they're very digestible, and students like to read them. The problem with a textbook is a lot of times the students don't read it or don't take full advantage of a gigantic resource like that anyway.
Yeah.
So having it be digestible in that form and in a way that's fun and lighthearted, not so heavy and like, let's talk about Bach today,
Right.
Even though, he makes appearances, but that it's in this, fun way. I think that's really fantastic.
Well, and I think there's a measure of trust that our students give us that we kind of have to live up to, that we're going to tell them stuff that's useful and not burden them with stuff that's unnecessary. And and that's something I certainly do in my classes too, where it's like, okay, I could go into gory detail about XYZ, like, oh, let's look at these bizarre alterations of augmented six chords or whatever. But I have to be ready to say, for the students, like, okay, well, when am I going to use this? And I think, gosh, I look at like the other faculty in my departments, like none of them use this on a daily basis. Like, why should I burden you with it? And so that's, there's a balance between, kind of being at the whim of a beginning theory student and saying, I'll just only give you what you think you need, because they often need more than they think they need. But we can balance that, because if we start really just, giving them busy work and doing, going on and on about stuff that's not going to have a lot of value later on in their career, then why should they trust us to listen to anything? So that's definitely something that, those sheets have helped me kind of gauge that, is say, okay, well, let me boil this down. Let me get you your money's worth of education here and boil this down to something that makes sense. But then also kind of, try to get you excited about it, because once you're excited about learning something, then you start to be eager to dig a little deeper and go a little further and push yourself. So that's, music theory has such a bad reputation from years and years and years of people just like, oh, well, this is the flunk out class and I'm going to make you work for it. And like, oh gosh, we're not doing ourselves any favors by saying that. Let's try to instill in our students the passion that got us into the field and get them excited about what got us here. I think that's going to go a lot farther.
That's so true. We've never had somebody articulate it that way, that we have sort of an agreement with our students that we're doing our best to give them the skills, the knowledge, the things that they need and are likely to, come back to as they move throughout their career, even though we can't predict that perfectly, of course. But that's never been articulated quite that way. But I think we all definitely share that philosophy that the class should be useful and practical. It made me think of every now and then you have a student that's advanced and really curious. And when a student like that asks a really good question that I know is way beyond what we need to do today in class, I will always say to everyone in the room, I'm going to answer this question. But if you are already overwhelmed with what we did today, feel free to tune me out for the next 2 minutes.
I do the same thing. That's exactly it. Yeah.
I had a student one time actually cover her ears and say, just flag me down when you're done. Yeah. She was like, I cannot.
Yeah. My brain is already full. Yeah. That's really funny. And I think too, like, even in this moment of time, like after, going through online learning and everything like that happened with the pandemic, we're really kind of like a lot of students have kind of started to say, oh, well, why do I need to bother with this whole going to class and learning from a college professor kind of thing? There's so much online. I could learn, stuff on my own and that kind of thing. So I think it's incumbent on us to kind of answer that and say, what added value are we providing? And so if I can be more of a facilitator for learning and not just do more than just like say the stuff that's already out there, that actually actively guide my students, and that I think makes it more worth their while.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think we sometimes think that the students are there just for the topics or the concepts, but they're also there for us. Like they want to learn from an expert, or they want to learn from a person, right?
Right.
And so we need to think that we're part of the product in a way as well when we're teaching. It's not just the concepts.
Yeah, absolutely.
So speaking of concepts and topics and curriculum, you have made a lot of changes to your curriculum, and I'm so glad you told us about this before our conversation, because this was new to me. And so talk to us a little bit about kind of the changes that you've made, because from the research and the presentation that we were able to watch that you shared with us, I mean, you've done a wholesale rethink about what music theory is like at your school. And so maybe kind of talk us through maybe kind of the genesis of how that started and kind of work our way to the present day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is definitely my current, passion project. I'm really excited about it, and you're going to have to shut me up after a while because I'm just going to keep going on and on about it. But when I came to the University of Dayton, there was one other theorist. It's a smaller school. We have like 80 majors. It's a smaller department, I should say. That it's like an R2 university, but we've got a fairly small music department, just undergrad, no grad students. And so when I first came, I was actually the first second theory professor. Like there had only been one theory professor since the creation of the department. Yeah, exactly. And so this was the first time that there was a second one. And the guy who was here, Phil Magnuson, a great guy, and he kind of had a reputation in the department as being sort of the department curmudgeon. And when I first came, like at the first faculty meetings, they're like, "Oh wow, you have to work with Phil. I hope that works out okay." I was like, "Gosh, he seems really nice to me." But Phil died last year, unfortunately. But I don't think he would disagree with me saying any of that. But anyway, so when I came to UD, I kind of felt, he had been teaching here for 30 years, and I kind of felt like, oh, I ought to just kind of teach the curriculum he's teaching, because he didn't specify that I had to do that, but I could tell he really wanted me to do that. And it wasn't really something that I fully enjoyed or believed in. We were talking about knocking Fuchs. It was very species counterpoint, and then moving into Schenkerian notation, which it's got its place, but it wasn't the way that I was used to teaching, and so I kind of did it. And then he retired several years back, and I kind of thought, okay, now's my chance to sort of kind of redo things that I wanted, the way I want to do it. And I happened to have a sabbatical, my first sabbatical when that happened. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to take my sabbatical. I'm just going to completely go through the curriculum. And I wanted to, my goal was, there were a few different goals. One was to really take a good hard look at everything that we're teaching and ask ourselves, is this useful, relevant, beneficial for a 21st century musician, and that kind of thing. I wanted to go through and diversify our curriculum in the way that a lot of us are doing now, where it's like, let's kind of get away from just constant old dead white German guys and let's see how we can bring in some diverse voices. And I really wanted to kind of take a look at our students specifically and say, okay, where are they going after they graduate? What kind of careers are they going into? And what is going to be beneficial for them, for a theory class? So I have a benefit here that I know a lot of people don't have, and that is that my faculty in my department are very supportive. Like when I said that I wanted to overhaul the curriculum, they were just like, yeah, great. It's about time. Let's do it. They were ready. They had been, I think, hearing from students about how frustrated they were that, I have to learn this and that for theory, and it doesn't really, I don't feel like it applies. But so they and also bringing in diverse repertoire and whatnot, and they wanted to be able to apply that a little bit more. So that was something that really was helpful as I kind of looked into doing this. So I started by really taking a good hard look at everything in the curriculum and saying, okay, is this something that a 21st century student will need, will find useful, will find relevant in their career? And that meant a lot of times cutting some darlings out of our traditional curriculum that in some cases, I think that I genuinely think that there are some things that we have taught generation after generation in the theory curriculum simply because it's what we learned when we took theory. Mm-hmm. And there are a few things where I thought, okay, well, who's going to use this? And when I found stuff where it's like, okay, the only people that I think are going to use this are students who are going to go on to teach music theory in college, so that it's like, okay, now wait a minute, this is a feedback loop that we don't need to have. And so it allowed me to make room for a lot more stuff in the curriculum that I think we do need. So, for example, acoustics, something that we start with in this curriculum, the nature of sound and how it propagates and how it's generated and how the ear works. And I think that this is something that first-year college students can totally understand. We don't have to go into the gory depths of physics and deal with Fourier transformations and that kind of stuff. For them to understand, like, okay, well, amplitude and frequency, like this is what makes up sound, and then building that. And then that stuff does have an application when you get into things like tuning and that kind of thing. One of the things that I really am passionate about with this, so with the curriculum, basically I took in the old curriculum, the fourth semester was devoted to 20th century music, essentially post-romantic up through the modern day, and so dealing with things like starting with Impressionism and whatnot, but then going through the 12-tone row stuff and minimalism and that kind of thing. In this new curriculum, I actually kind of have gotten all of that. We spend the last half of the third semester doing that, and the first half of the fourth semester is all devoted to electronics, because in my mind, we talk about common practice period and the common practice, and that's a valuable thing. But in my mind, one of the common practices of today is studio recording and electronics and filters and effects and things like that, because honestly, 90% of the music that is listened to by the human race is, I don't know, that I'm just pulling that statistic out of thin air, but
you're on a what podcast, so you're an expert.
Oh, yeah, right,
so
that's right. but so much of it is stuff that's created in a studio and produced, and it's easy for us to say, okay, well, that's not real, or that doesn't have academic value. But no, I think it absolutely has academic value. And if I tell my students, like, my personal definition of music is something that causes an emotional reaction in the listener. And if there's someone, in tears listening to a tune that has just moved them in a certain way, somebody did something right. And it may well be, a committee of people working together to create that. But there's some value there, and there's something that I, as a theorist, want to figure out how it works. And so that's something that I've tried to add in this curriculum. And I failed to mention that this has been a collaboration with my colleague Stephanie Acevedo, who's at the University of Connecticut, and she was here at University of Dayton, and we've kind of continued to work together on this. But it's been really a great partnership, and I think she's very patient with all of my cockamamie ideas about this kind of stuff, but with the electronic stuff, like, that's something that I think we need to really start taking seriously from a music theory point of view. It's always been sort of, in my mind, sort of sidelined into music technology courses, which are almost never, in my experience, required. They're always like kind of, oh, here's some cool stuff that you can take if you're interested in it. I mean, this is what's creating music nowadays, and if we don't, if we're not educating our students on that, then we're not doing them any favors. And of course, it's a huge learning curve for me, because I'm not a recording engineer. Like, I've been, I've tried to learn a lot of this as I go along, but that's obviously the huge challenge with this is educating ourselves. So yeah, that's kind of what sort of the long and short of it. But so with adding that stuff in, yeah, there's stuff that I've had to, if not take out, then definitely reduce. So I used to spend a week on Augmented Six Chords, and we talked about the different part writing elements of it and resolutions, and we talk about the different you could build them on the flat 2 or on the 4, or you could invert them and that kind of thing. And now I spend I spend a week talking about chromatic harmony in general. So in a week, we touch on Neapolitan 6, we touch on secondary dominants, we touch on Augmented Six Chords, and things like that. And because I think, the 21st century musician, if they're aware of these things, if they know they exist, then if it becomes important later on in their college career or later on in their professional career, they can look it up, and they've got the basic understanding for that without me making them do 2 weeks worth of busy work and then memorization for a final exam and that kind of thing. So I recognize that may offend some folks out there, but that's kind of it. And yeah, so like things like the 4-part writing and all the gory details of parallel fifths and that kind of thing. If we kind of approach that from, let's talk about counterpoint in general, and we can use some of these techniques as sort of case studies, like, oh, here's how Bach handled this kind of thing. One of the things that I am also trying to do with this is sort of challenge the myth that I think we are all aware of, that students come away with saying, oh, well, here are the rules for writing music, when we know that that's not really what it is, that these are patterns of how some people wrote music, but it's not, I'm sure we all had that experience. I had it in undergrad where I wrote a piece for choir, and the choir director was looking at us like, oh, well, you've got some parallel fifths here. And I'm like, yeah, so is that a problem? It's not a rule. But our students come away with that simply because of how we frame it. Like if we start from square one saying, okay, we're going to look at common practice period music, and impressionable youth, they're going to see that as like, oh, okay, well, this is the good stuff, and I don't want to write the bad stuff. So coming at it from a more neutral point of view, I think is really important. Saying, okay, let's, and we can go the whole way, like notation itself, like our traditional method of notation. I think it's best to say, okay, here's one way of doing it, because there are other ways of doing it. So lead sheet notation, that's, another way of doing it, that most of, what you're hearing on the radio, you're not going to find a full score to, Beyonce's latest album, because it doesn't exist anywhere. Like, it was assembled and created sort of on the fly. And then, you can talk about standard MIDI format and Braille music notation and stuff like that as part of that. So it's a challenge, definitely. And I don't claim to have it all figured out yet. This is definitely a work in progress, and it will forever be a work in progress. But I've had really good results so far. And we haven't been using it long enough to graduate a class with it yet. So, that'll be one of the things, like, ask me again in 8 years and where I can kind of talk to the alumni and say, hey, did we help you, or did we make it worse? And so, yeah, that's kind of where that's at.
That's awesome. Yeah, I wrote on one of my homeworks, like, to have everyone write, I think it was like a deceptive progression or something.
Yeah.
And move all the voices in the same direction, create like parallel motion. Right. And one of my graders like freaked out, and they were like, is this a mistake? Or like, Dr. Graff, like, have you lost your mind, And I was like, no, I was trying to, have them write that, and then write like as a different way.
Right.
Yeah. And it's crazy, like even students coming in, even having taken AP theory, one of my students wrote on my evaluation something like, oh, I like the way you presented it as like different options. I didn't even know it was an option to write like parallel motion. Right. And I'm like, of course that's like an option. Yeah. Like, that's crazy that you had that, idea coming into the class. Absolutely. Like, wow.
Yeah. And I think that, that's something, I certainly have had a few students in the last few years where I can see them in the back room just kind of grumbling. It's like, this nonsense. I want to just learn about the real way of writing like Bach and that kind of thing. And I think that too, one of the nagging things that, as I was putting this together in the way that I teach, is that I think that it's actually easier on the students. Like, they're not, it's coming to them a little bit easier, and part of like the college professor in me is worried that, oh, I'm not making them work hard enough. Like they're not memorizing things. They're not, stressing out about a final exam, that kind of thing. But one of the things that I've learned with this is that there can be academic value in just giving the students an excuse to try something they haven't done before. So like I spend a week talking about rap, and I'm like the last person to profess about rap, but I've learned a lot about rap. And again, like here I'm trying to really come at it from a theory point of view. It's like, let's break down what are the different components. Let's look at rap tunes and figure out like what's making this successful, and where's the art happening here. And so as part of that, I make each of the students write a rap, and I have them perform it in class. And of course, it's goofy fun, and I walk the walk. I write a new rap every year, and it's always, theory professor adjacent rap. But I'm under, like, it's an easy assignment. They have fun doing it, and they probably don't, like, it's not super hard for them to do. But I bet that they would not have written a rap if I hadn't assigned them that assignment. And so now they know that they can write and perform a rap. And it may not be, Dr. Dre level or anything like that, but it's got some rules. Like, okay, you have to include, internal rhymes. You have to include what's the term? It's when they basically kind of have a pun in there, and the different components that we sort of discover through the assignment. So, but yeah, it makes it more accessible to them. It gives them a greater appreciation when they're listening to rap. Then they can say, "Oh, I see what he's doing here. That I can respect the creative process a little bit more." I think that's valuable. I think that's a good experience, and even if it's not necessarily hard or difficult, I think it's beneficial.
At first, when you said, make the students create something that they have never done before, like, that's obviously what we want to have them do, but in the way, that's what we are always doing. It's just, it seems that some of the things that we're making them do for the first time aren't so appropriate. Right. Like, how many of those students have written a 4-voice chorale?
Right.
Unless they took an AP, none of them have, right? Yeah. So how many students have written a rap? Very few, right? It's what we're asking them to do. That's rather than we're already doing that. We're already making them do things they've never done before. But now we're thinking more about what they could actually be relevant or what could be useful in their career rather than, well, I had to do this, therefore you must do it as well.
Right. And maybe, obviously you have to find balance, because then it's like, okay, well, I may not, if it's a 4-part thing, okay, well, maybe it's not going to cover every little detail of 4-part writing as we understand in a discipline, but if it kind of gets them in the door and starts those ideas working in their head, then that can be beneficial. And certainly some of them are going to see that, do that and then want to go further, and hopefully that kind of introduces some interest in that way. But, yeah.
I was curious about some of the student feedback on the presentation that you had given. The students who are kind of in that transitional year were a little more negative, or not quite as on board, I guess, compared to the students who started, I guess, when they were freshmen and through the whole curriculum. Yeah. Do you have a notion why those students who were in that kind of transitional year were a little more hesitant or not as positive about the experience?
Right. We have small enough classes that I don't know that there's, we can do a real thorough study of that. I think kind of what, with some hindsight, I think what we kind of figured out was that classes are just different. that we just have, you just kind of, it's luck of the draw. And that particular class, so yeah, this was, I think, our second class. Like, we had one class that started halfway through the new curriculum, and then the next class kind of had it from the beginning. I think we're so, when you're doing curricular design, you're so focused on, okay, well, let me get the student feedback, let me figure out that we sometimes forget, okay, well, for one thing, they're college, first year college students, that they're coming from a bunch of different perspectives and a lot of preconceptions, and they don't really have a good, they don't have the same perspective as we do. And then, that every year it's just a different batch of students. And I think that we can kind of, fret about that kind of thing, but sometimes we just have to take a step back and say, okay, let me just give it some more time, because I think it was just that one class of students, for whatever reason, they seemed to be a little bit less into it. I remember there was one student in that class that I could tell was real hard. So I think she still hates me, but that sort of thing. And then the next class, they're like, yeah, this is great. We're totally on board with this. So I think, especially when you're dealing with smaller class sizes, you just kind of have to say, okay, we're not going to get the perfect feedback. We're not going to get excellent, readable results from this without just kind of giving it some time and trying it out. And it may be, you know, after 5 years, we kind of look back and say, yeah, this has sort of been a bad direction. We need to alter it further. I'm sure that we're going to be changing it as we go. There's just so many variables that it's kind of an impossible thing to be able to approach it scientifically. You just kind of have to say, well, we're just going to do our best and see what we can do.
Yeah. I found that if I can keep making my music ed faculty happy, because they have to make sure that those students pass the
That's it.
Content exam, right?
And that is actually one of the big challenges that we, especially with the first semester, starting with acoustics, where we weren't really getting into traditional notation until farther in, and then we had class piano teachers like, why can't these students like read triads yet? It's like, yeah, well, about that. So it kind of forced us to sort of take a look at that and say, okay, well, let's maybe we can find ways to introduce that in smaller, because certainly some of them come in to their first year like knowing how to read music, no problem, but there are a few that don't, and so like, do we need to have an extra kind of thing, or do we split it up where on Fridays that you only have to come to class if you need if you're needing help with notation, that kind of, we're still figuring that stuff out. That's definitely and then of course where farther out, where this starts to make us wonder, it's like, okay, we've got students who took AP music theory in high school, and then they come like, hey, I'm ready to test out a theory, and we're like, about that. Where like, okay, that what you learned was really valuable, and it's going to help you in the long run, but you still have to take theory 1. Sorry, because we're not covering that. And then if they're going on to grad school entrance exams, like are we preparing them for that? For that, we kind of have to say, okay, well, if you're looking at that, then let's, your junior, senior year, let's kind of give you some other exercises to work with. But we're not going to let that stop us, because this change, I think, needs to happen. And the place that it kind of has to start is here, because we're teaching the next generation of K through 12 music educators. So hopefully they're going to take that back, and eventually the AP theory test is going to say, okay, we need to get with the times. And certainly, same thing's going to happen with grad school entrance exams. I hope. I can see it. Like there's so many people working on similar types of changes that I think it's just a foregone conclusion that it's going to happen. Yeah,
definitely. Well, if I could get back to the student feedback issue, I've run into the student feedback point that you bring up is so well taken, even with a topic that few people would debate. I was going over, for example, key signatures, major key signatures. I don't think anybody's debating eliminating that from the curriculum. If you are, email us. I'd love to have you on. But one of my students, I was just talking about tips and tricks, major keys. I mean, this is like, theory 1. And I talked about, okay, second to last flat, there's your major do. Take the last sharp go up, T do. There's your major do. And after class, the student comes up to me, Dr. Graff, wouldn't you want us to be better musicians and just memorize all of our keys cold? And I said, well, let me dig into your response here a bit, because you've got 2 assumptions here. Number 1 is that you have to memorize all your key signatures to know them. Some people are just not at that stage, and you just have to have a tip or a trick on occasion. And I said the second part is about pairing the idea of a better musician with the idea of even, number 1, knowing your keys and reading notation in general.
Right.
And I'm like, there's just so much in your statement here. I appreciate your sentiment that you want to know them cold, but just take a second and think about what you said. Because it's just like, even that, it's like a major key signatures, and I'm just like, wow, you really have that much beef with me saying the second to last flat is do?
Yeah, and that's absolutely, like, you, bless her heart. first year music students tend to be experts on music pedagogy. It's like, oh, well, here's the way it ought to be taught. And it's like, okay, you don't want to like crush their spirits, but you also kind of like, okay, I've been doing this a little longer than you have. So, I like to use the Mr. Miyagi analogy, but that's becoming less and less effective as fewer and fewer people know. It's like you have to paint the fence. Yeah, it's like, what does that mean, Dr. Rush? I have no idea what you're talking about. So, but yeah, you've got to put a little faith in the fact that I've like dedicated my life to teaching this, and I know that there's things that I still need to learn, but I bet I can give you something. So yeah, that's definitely we have to balance that. We have to listen to the students because they are telling us how it is from their perspective, and that is a valuable thing. But then we also have to make sure that we're not just, kowtowing to everything and forgetting like, wait a minute, I've got like advanced degrees in this. I should trust my judgment a little bit.
Yeah. And I have nothing against memorizing your keys. I'm just putting that out there. There's a lot more to that one response that particular student said that it's just like, oh my goodness, where do I even start?
Well, and I find myself just doing everything I can to avoid any memorization. Like there's a place for it, but like if you know the why and you can just figure it out that way, then you don't need to memorize it. And memorization is faulty because then you're just relying on rote stuff and not like understanding. You don't have the capacity to do a sanity check and say, okay, well, does this make sense? Like, 18 sharps seems like a lot for a key signature, but that's what my calculations came up to, so I guess that's what it is. So,
exactly.
I agree.
So I've done some pretty big curricular overhaul here too. It's actually happened sort of twice while I've been here. I'm starting my 10th year this fall in my full-time job. But one of the challenges that I've had is we have a very kind of particular aural skills curriculum. It is paired to the content in the theory classes, and it works, right? Like when our students get to the end, they're having no trouble getting into grad school. They usually pass the aural part of the music ed exam, no problem. They have good skills. They take the music business students take an aural skills class that's for recording engineers. At some point, but they're doing well there too. They're coming in with the skills they need. So I think you can tell the question that's coming is, with a change this big and with a shift this large, what are you doing in aural skills?
Right. Yeah. And that is absolutely, very much on my mind. That's kind of our next topic, is we want to kind of do the same thing with aural skills. And primarily the first year of aural skills, we feel is probably more or less where we want it to be. I've always been I haven't taught I used to teach aural skills here, and my faculty load shifted, so I haven't taught aural skills for a few years. But when I've taught like first year aural skills, like again, kind of going to the memorization thing, like intervals, like how important are intervals right off? Like when we teach those like at the very beginning, then the students kind of have it in their minds like, oh, I have to use intervals for everything. It's like, no. Let's talk about melody, and let's talk about relative pitch and that kind of thing, and then get to intervals when it's useful. But then we kind of made a decision several years back that our first year of aural skills was really going to be focused on singing and audiation and getting them, able to sight read very effectively and whatnot, because we saw that as sort of a weakness in our particular students. And so it's the second year of aural skills that I'm really excited about, rocking the boat with. And part of that is like in Aural Skills 4, the first half of Aural Skills 4, since we're devoting it to electronics in theory, then that is, hey, let's listen to what filter is being used here, or how can you what can you do to recreate the resonance in this recording? Let's talk about mic placement. Let's talk about things like that, because those are aural skills that are relevant for a 21st century musician. And what I had done also, I think, was this Aural Skills 3? I'm trying to remember where I had it. was kind of following through with the whole sight reading thing. Let's keep going and talk about more performance. And basically I had a sort of a half semester assignment where it's like, I want you to perform and a self-accompanied piece in front of the class. And I'm not talking about solfege. I'm talking about get up there and belt out some Ingrid Michaelson or whatever with a guitar or a piano, because playing and singing, that's something that I never learned how to do. Like I can sing and I can play, but it's like chewing gum and walking. Like if you come talk to me when I'm trying to play, like I'll mess up. So like connecting those two. And for some of like about half of our students are music therapy majors, and that's like their bread and butter. So that's no problem there. But it's all the other students who are like, oh my gosh, I don't like, I'm not used to singing, much less like performing. But boy, if you can do that, then that advances you as a musician, and it gives you some skills that you can really rely on later on. So yeah, I definitely want to have that kind of, we've sort of put that off a few years because we've had some faculty position shakeups. So we're kind of trying to get, a place of stability there, and then start just taking apart the oral skills curriculum in the same way. Yeah. And that really kind of, one of the things that first inspired me to make the changes to the theory curriculum was actually a talk, I want to say it was SMT in Arlington, I don't remember, but it was Tim Chenette gave this talk called "What Are the Truly Oral Skills?" And it was a fantastic talk. And one slide that he put up was like this target sort of thing, and at the center, it was like skills that every musician needs. But as you went out to the edges of the circle, it was more specific to particular disciplines. Like if they're going into music education, here are oral skills that they need. If they're going into performance, if they're going into therapy, if they're going into recording technology, where then that was something that those students might need more than other students. And I kind of sat there and saw that. I was like, that was sort of a revelation to me. I was like, oh, this is what I need to do with theory. Like, we need to figure out what are the true theory concepts that everyone needs, and then how can we go out, and determine what each specific, and some theorists have been doing that in a more modular way, where like, okay, well, for the second year, then if you're a ed major, you go this direction and that kind of thing. And we have two sections of first year theory and one section of second year theory. We don't have the faculty or student load to be able to do something like that and break it up. So that's something that's like, okay, well, this is what we're trying to do is sort of be a little bit more open to different concepts for different types of disciplines, and be as relevant as we can throughout all of it.
Yeah, that Timothy Chenette article now is was a pre-reading for my workshop that I did last year, and everyone really liked it. We had a long discussion about that, and it really raises a lot of good questions.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely.
So the other thought I had while you were talking about this is there's not a book that exists that does this.
Right. Yes.
Or is there?
Well, funny you should mention it. No, that was we knew going into this, like, okay, we're going to have to make everything. Like, we're going to have to and just collect stuff from online, that kind of thing. So what Stephanie and I did, is we started by creating this wiki, which I shared with you guys, that is public, and we invite anyone to look at it. But basically, sort of as a clearinghouse for, there's a page for each lesson, and there's course objectives. There's stuff we've collected for like worksheets and resources and whatnot, as just basically a way to kind of start teaching with this. And that was the goal was always to write a book, and so we are working on a book, and it's not ready for public perusal yet. I shared it with you guys with the podcast, but I'm super excited about this, and like literally, like I'm tinkering at it before we recorded today, because it is an online text, kind of inspired by the success that like open music theory has had, and there's a few other great textbooks out there, but I'm also an armchair computer programmer. Like I've always loved tinkering with this kind of stuff, and so I'm excited about this because it's the goal here is to take advantage of the online format and have things that are interactive, so that there's a way to, instead of just seeing a waveform, like, oh, let's play with it and see what it sounds like and manipulate things like that. So that's something that I'm feverishly working on, and I can't tell you exactly when it's going to be done. And even like right now, I've kind of gotten the second half of the book to an alpha state, where it's just ready for me ready enough for me to use in my classes, but it's still got a lot of work to do. And but once it's done, we are fully intent on making it freely available for everyone to use. So that's something I'm just super excited about.
Yeah, I encourage everyone to check it out. I did some work before this looking at it based on what you sent us, and I was very impressed. Very impressed.
Yeah.
Highly recommend.
Yeah, and that wiki, the reason we have it as a wiki is we invite other people to submit stuff, and we're not trying to say this is the only way. Like we're going to benefit by as many voices as we can putting this together. Yeah.
That's great. Well, this has been such a treat, Toby, to chat with you. Time has just flown by.
Likewise.
But we'd always like to end just with some short, rapid-fire questions, just off the cuff, soundbite, little tweet-worthy things, I guess. Though I think we do have a Twitter account, but we are never on it. So, Ben or Jen, do you have one?
I have one.
All right.
Okay.
I'm ready.
So, I'm a brand new music theory master's student. What should I be learning that I'm probably not learning the way things are set up right now?
Oh man, that's a really good question. I guess I think teaching stuff that you have not been taught, if that makes sense, like the capacity to go out and take something like rap, whether it's rap or electronic music or recording acoustics, and be able to say, okay, I'm gonna digest enough of this to present it to a student, and part of that is being honest with the student and saying, you know what, I'm learning this too. Let's learn it together rather than try to come off as some expert. And then part of it too is seeking out expertise from other places and that kind of thing. But learn to be a facilitator of knowledge, because just like if you only teach what you know, then you're limiting your students, and that kind of gets us into the place where we're trying to fight to get out of as a discipline right now is only teaching what we know. So that's a great question.
That's a great answer.
Thank you.
I like it. That's good.
Yeah, I love it. You want me to go, Paul?
Sure.
All right, number one most important aural skill.
Oh, wow. I think singing, like just vocalizing, because I can tell you that when I started as a freshman, I've told this story so many times to my students, but when I started as a freshman in college, I had never really sung. Like I was not comfortable singing whatsoever. I would whistle, but I just felt like so self-conscious, and somehow, and I still don't really know how, and there wasn't like a girl involved or anything like that, I got talked into joining choir. And it was the best thing for my musicianship as an undergraduate, was and I am not a good singer. Like I am not my voice, I don't have, all the depth of vocal quality and proper breathing and that kind of thing, but I've got a great ear and I can sing on pitch and that kind of thing. And that has helped so much. So yeah, I think that's number one. If you're, it's not just being able to sing, it's being comfortable singing. And being comfortable singing in front of other people and being okay with the fact that you may not sound beautiful doing it, but that you can sing like that. That's what I tell my students anyway.
That's good.
That's great. All right, so mine has to do with common practice period, because when you're talking about that, we think of the common practice period as a certain, that's Bach,
right.
Mozart, Beethoven. But what if we thought of common practice as just the way music is commonly made now, right?
Yes.
And that's what you're talking about. So in our current common practice period,
Right.
give me 2 or 3 names that would be like our Bach, Mozart, or Beethoven.
Oh, wow. Oh, man. Yeah, you're totally putting me on the spot with this because it's so easy for me to just like choose some of my favorite popular artists. But I think you probably like, if you're really looking at common practice, then you're probably looking at some of these big name producers that are, that you see popping up on everywhere. And I'm totally going to be embarrassing myself because I can't think of the guy's name, but like the Swedish guy who does like Britney and everybody.
Max Martin.
Yes, Max Martin. So there's one, love him or hate him. Like that's, you're hearing that all over the place. And you could go back, again, Phil Spector in as much as the problematic elements with his personal life. But, there's a sound that, is very familiar. And so I don't want to like, I don't think we should idolize and just choose 1 or 2 names. Like there shouldn't be a Bach, a Beethoven, that kind of like if we only limit it to a particular person or a group of people, then we're sort of making the same mistakes that we were making before. But there are definitely techniques and sounds and concepts that are common to today's music practice that we need to start taking a little bit more seriously in theory classes.
Yeah, I love that. I love the common practice idea happening now, right? Yeah. Like what is common here. Right. So as we wrap up, just maybe let our listeners know where they can find you. You have quite a web presence, and so just where they can reach out and find what you're up to.
Yeah. Basically, Toby Rush. The fact that I've got a good theorist name has benefited me well in that way. There is another Toby Rush in Kansas who I'm familiar with because we get each other's mail every now and then. But TobyRush.com is my website, and it's got. I need to update the homepage. Maybe I'll do that before this goes to air. But that's where the theory pages are. That's where the wiki is. I've got some other stuff in there that tinkering things that I do. I've got a Braille music utility that some people might find useful. I'm Toby Rush on Twitter as well. If you want to follow me there. I probably consume more than I produce on Twitter, but I'm still there. And I'm at TRush1. That's the one place that I'm not Toby Rush. TRush1@udayton.edu is my email address, and I'd love to hear what people are doing and how we can make this theory world a little bit better.
You just made it to the end of another episode of Note Doctors, the music theory and pedagogy podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and review the podcast, and you can always reach us at notedoctorspodcast@gmail.com with comments, questions, or show ideas. Thanks for listening.